I always thought I came from an ordinary family. Holiday dinners, black and white photos in dusty albums, stories told and retold until they became our truth. My grandfather was the center of it all, strong, wise, and always calm. The kind of man who seemed like he had nothing left to hide. But on the day he died, he whispered 6 words that shattered everything I believed. She wasn't who you think. That moment opened a door I didn't even know existed. A door to a past filled with hidden letters, a secret romance, and a woman erased from every photo and memory. What began as a quiet goodbye became a journey that would shake the foundation of our entire family. I thought I knew where I came from. I was wrong. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang. The kind of call you don't expect, yet somehow know deep down will come eventually. I was in the middle of a meeting, distracted, barely listening to the voice on the other end. It was my cousin Ellie. Her words were soft, like she was trying not to break something fragile. "It's Grandpa," she said. "He doesn't have much time. You should come." There was no dramatic pause, no flood of emotions, just silence. A deep, slow silence that stretched across the years of absence I had allowed to grow between us. I hadn't been home in over 7 years. Not since my father's funeral. Not since the fights. The tension, the secrets no one wanted to name. I booked the next flight out and arrived the following morning. The old family home looked exactly the same. Weathered siding, peeling paint, the porch swing still creaking in the wind like it had been waiting for someone to return. The driveway was lined with familiar cars, though some faces I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Inside, the house was quieter than I remembered. No laughter, no clinking dishes. Just the muffled shuffle of slippers against hardwood and whispers behind closed doors. My mother greeted me with red-rimmed eyes and a forced smile. "He's been asking for you," she said. She led me down the hallway to the back room, where the blinds were half drawn and the air smelled of old medicine and mint tea. And there he was, my grandfather. Once a towering man, now shrunken beneath layers of blankets. His eyes opened as I entered, dull but still aware. He smiled faintly. "There you are." I knelt beside the bed, unsure of what to say. "Hey, Grandpa," was all I could manage. His hand reached for mine, cold and trembling. "You look just like him," he whispered. I didn't ask who he meant. I didn't need to. There was a long pause. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was searching for a moment of courage buried deep beneath all the years he hadn't spoken the truth. Then, suddenly, he pulled me a little closer. His voice was almost inaudible. "She wasn't who you think she was." I stared at him, confused. "Who?" But he didn't answer. His eyes closed and his breathing slowed. I called for my mother, for the nurse, for anyone. But there was nothing left to do. He was still alive, barely, but whatever he wanted to say had slipped behind his fading breath. I sat there for hours after everyone else left the room, just watching him, watching the man who had built our family lose his final strength, moment by moment. I replayed his words over and over in my head. She wasn't who you think she was. Who was she? My grandmother, my mother, someone else entirely. By the time the sun set, the question had burned itself into my bones. I wandered the house like a ghost, searching for something I couldn't name. Every photo on the wall, every trinket on the shelves, suddenly they felt like lies. Carefully arranged illusions of a story we'd all believed without question. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom. The same glow-in-the-dark stars still clung to the ceiling. The same bookshelf still held my childhood trophies and dusty, old novels. But everything felt foreign, as though the truth had quietly reshaped the walls in the hours since my return. Around 3 a.m., I was awoken by soft footsteps. It was my aunt, gently knocking on the door. "He's gone," she said, eyes full of grief and relief. "He passed in his sleep." I nodded, numb, but I wasn't just mourning his death. I was mourning the final words that would now never be fully explained. I was mourning the version of my family that just a day ago I had believed to be whole, returned to his room, alone. The nurses had cleaned everything. The sheets had been changed. The room smelled of lavender now, not decay, but something was different. On the nightstand, where his glasses usually rested, was a small leather-bound notebook. I picked it up. Inside was an envelope sealed and yellowed by age. My name was written on the front. The handwriting was his. My heart pounded as I stared at it, the silence around me thick with weight. He hadn't left me with just 6 words. He had left me this. The envelope sat in my hands like it weighed 100 pounds. I stared at it, heart thudding in my chest, afraid to open it and afraid not to. The room was still, the kind of stillness that only follows death. Outside I could hear the wind brushing against the old windows, the occasional creak of the porch, but inside me everything was noise. I took a deep breath, sat down in the chair, next to where Grandpa had taken his final breath, and opened it. Inside was a folded letter and a small photograph. The photo came first. It was black and white, edges curled with time. In it, a young woman stood beside a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't Grandpa and he wasn't my father. She was beautiful. Her hair was tied in a scarf, her dress patterned with flowers. She was smiling, but there was something behind her eyes. Something unreadable. On the back of the photo, written in that same shaky handwriting, was a name. Evelyn, 1961. My stomach dropped. I didn't know who Evelyn was, and that was already a problem. I unfolded the letter. My boy, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't have the strength to tell you this myself, but I've carried this secret for too long, and I didn't want to take it with me. You deserve to know the truth. You always did. The woman in the photo, her name was Evelyn. She was my first love, maybe my only real love. And she was not just a part of my past. She's a part of your story too. There are things about your father, about our family, that you've never been told. Things that were hidden to protect us. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. But lies, even well-intentioned ones, rot from the inside out. I can't undo what was done, but I can leave you the truth. Go to the attic. Behind the 3rd beam, there's a box. Everything begins there. I reread the letter twice, my hands shaking by the end. Evelyn, a box in the attic, the truth about my father. I had come back to say goodbye to a man I thought I knew. Instead, I found myself on the edge of unraveling a history I'd never even questioned. I tucked the photo and letter back into the envelope and made my way to the attic. The wooden stairs creaked beneath my feet, dust rising in beams of morning light. I hadn't been up there in years. It still smelled the same: old books, insulation, mothballs, and time. Boxes were stacked from wall to wall, labeled with things like Christmas baby clothes and junk don't open. I found the 3rd beam easily. It was cracked and slightly warped, just like Grandpa had described. Behind it, I found a thin wooden panel that was loose to the touch. I pried it open. Inside the hidden space was a metal box, rusted at the corners and bound with a thin leather strap. No lock, no markings. I pulled it out and sat on the dusty floor. For a moment I didn't move. I just stared at it. Was I ready? Probably not. But I opened it anyway. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied together in bundles by year. Some were addressed to T. Others had no name at all, just dates. Beneath the letters, a small stack of Polaroids, one of Evelyn holding a baby, another of her standing on a porch that looked suspiciously like ours, just younger, newer. At the bottom of the box, a worn leather notebook. My grandfather's journal. I opened it, flipped past the blank first pages, and stopped when I saw her name again. Evelyn. Her name appeared again and again, scrawled in the margins, circled, underlined. Entire pages were devoted to her. Some entries were full of longing, others of guilt. But one sentence repeated in several places. She should have been the one. My throat tightened. He hadn't just loved her. He had never stopped. I sat there on the attic floor for what felt like hours, reading piece by piece the story of a man I thought I knew, falling in love, being torn apart, and carrying a secret that changed the very foundation of our family. What I didn't understand yet, what I was about to learn, was that Evelyn hadn't just been a lost love, she had been erased, and someone in my family had made sure of it. The journal was old. Its leather cover had cracks like dried riverbeds, and the corners were frayed, worn down by decades of being opened, closed, hidden, and perhaps even clutched in moments of guilt. I turned the first few pages slowly, careful not to smudge the faded ink. Most of the entries weren't dated, but the handwriting changed over time, starting neat and controlled, then becoming looser, more erratic, as if the weight of the memories had started to shake even his hands. The first full page I read began with a name. Evelyn came by the shop again today. She asked for sugar, but I think she just wanted to talk. Her scarf was red this time, always red in the winter. It suits her. I offered to walk her home. I didn't want the conversation to end. God help me. I think I'm falling in love. That was the first time. As I flipped through the pages, a picture began to form. My grandfather hadn't just had an affair. He had lived an entire second life, one filled with laughter, promise, and fire. His words when he wrote about Evelyn were so different from the man I had known. They were alive. I kissed her today. It was raining. We stood under the awning by Dawson's Market, and she looked up at me like she'd known me forever. I couldn't help it. I kissed her like the world was ending, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The next pages were filled with notes and reflections, some poetic, some broken, but all soaked in feeling. He loved her. That was undeniable. But then the tone shifted. She's pregnant. She was shaking when she told me. I tried to act calm, but I wasn't. I wasn't scared of the child. I was scared of what this town would do, of what my family would do. My father will never accept this. My wife. She already suspects something. If she finds out, I'll lose everything. But I can't let Evelyn go through this alone. I won't. My heart stopped. I reread that paragraph 3 times before moving on. So she had a child. But who? And then it hit me. My father was born in 1962. I flipped further ahead, the entries now darker, the handwriting shakier. They're taking her away. My wife, your grandmother, she told her. Brother, he pulled some strings. Evelyn is being sent to rest. That's what they're calling it. A sanitarium. She's not sick, she's scared, and she's alone. They say it's for the best, that the child will be raised properly, that I should move on. But how do you erase your soul from your own body? He felt sick. They institutionalized her, against her will. I remembered how Grandma had always seemed composed, cold even, dignified in a way that allowed no questioning. She had never spoken of Evelyn, never hinted that my father might not be her biological son. And yet now, with every word I read, the truth became louder. They forged the records. Birth certificate lists my wife as the mother. Evelyn's name is gone. It's like she never existed, but I remember. I remember everything. I stopped and let the weight of it all settle into my bones. My father had grown up never knowing who his real mother was, and Grandpa, he had let it happen. The next entry was one of the last written in a steady hand. He's 5 now. He called me Dad with his arms around my neck. I almost told him the truth, but I couldn't. I couldn't see his face change. I couldn't risk him hating me, or her. But I saved everything. The letters she wrote, the photos, even the locket she gave me before they took her away. One day, someone will know. It was the clearest confession I could have hoped for. The truth wasn't whispered. It was documented, preserved, waiting. But it raised more questions. Where had Evelyn gone after the institution? Had she ever been released? Had she tried to reach out again? And who else in the family had known? I dug deeper into the metal box and found another bundle of envelopes. tied with a silk ribbon now yellowed with age. On each one was written a single word in the same familiar cursive, unsent, dozens of letters, never mailed, never read. Opened the first one. My darling Thomas, they don't let me see him. They say I'm not well, but all I feel is grief. I dream of him every night. I sing to him in my head, the lullabies I used to hum when he kicked inside me. Does he look like me? Or you? Promise me he'll know. Someday. Somehow. Let him know. I loved him. Let him know I never left by choice. Yours forever, Evelyn. My hands were shaking. I had stepped into this attic a grandson. I was now something else entirely. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I read until sunrise, surrounded by a box of ghosts and a journal full of truths that had waited half a century to be heard. When I finally closed the journal, the final entry stared back at me. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've found what I couldn't say. I only ask one thing. Don't let her be forgotten. She gave everything, and we took everything. Tell the story. I sat there in silence, the sun rising behind me, casting light on a truth that had lived too long in the dark. Her name had been just that, a name, Evelyn, scribbled in margins, signed at the bottom of letters, pressed onto the back of a photograph like a fading fingerprint. But now, she was becoming real. I spread the photos across the floor of the attic like a puzzle I hadn't known was missing from my life. Each image gave her more shape. In one, she stood in a garden, sun in her hair, holding a watering can. In another, she sat on a park bench with a book in her lap, looking directly at the camera, smiling with the kind of ease that makes you want to know what she was thinking. But it was the red scarf that haunted me. It appeared in almost every picture. Wound around her neck like armor, draped across her shoulders like a promise, bright, defiant, alive. It was the only color that hadn't faded in the old Polaroids, like it refused to be forgotten. Just like her. I returned to Grandpa's journal, flipping back to the earlier entries, searching for more about how they met. She worked at the bakery down the street. I'd stop in every Thursday morning, not for the bread, for her smile. She always wore that red scarf, even in summer. I asked her once why. She said it made her feel seen. She said it reminded her she was more than what people told her to be. That line stuck with me. More than what people told her to be. Had she been the town rebel, the outsider, or simply a woman who dared to want something different? My grandparents had lived in this small town their whole lives. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's secrets, but pretended they didn't. Where appearances mattered more than truth, and people whispered in church pews more often than they prayed. What must it have been like for her to be in love with a married man, to carry his child, to be erased for it? I brought the photo album and the journal downstairs that evening. My mother was in the kitchen, making tea. She glanced at the items in my hands, then back at my face. "What's all that?" she asked. "Grandpa's journal," I said, "and pictures of someone named Evelyn." She froze, just slightly, then continued stirring the tea. "Does that name mean anything to you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up, she said softly, "Your grandmother used to mention her. Briefly. Said she was trouble." I waited, sensing there was more. "She was beautiful," she continued. "I remember seeing her once, when I was a girl. At the bakery. Red scarf, bright lipstick. People said she wasn't from around here, that she'd come to town. After something went wrong in her own family, I didn't know the details. I just knew your grandmother didn't like her." "Did Dad ever know about her?" I asked. My mother hesitated again. "Not that I know of. But your grandfather and grandmother fought a lot around the time your dad was born, loudly. She accused him of betrayal. He moved out for 2 months, lived in the garage. Then one day, everything was fine again. No one ever talked about it." I nodded, heart heavy. So the cracks had always been there, just painted over. That night I sat alone with the letters. I chose one at random, dated a few months after my father would have been born. He has your eyes. The nurses let me hold him. Once, just for a minute. He wrapped his hand around my finger like he'd known me forever. Then they took him away. I whispered your name to him, Thomas. I wanted the first thing he ever heard to be love. My chest ached. I pressed the letter against my knee, holding it like it could transmit the warmth of her voice across the decades. She hadn't just been a lost love. She had been a mother. A stolen mother. One stripped of her title, her presence, her right to be remembered. And someone, my grandmother maybe more, had worked very hard to make sure of that. In another letter, Evelyn wrote, I hear he's growing strong. That he likes to play with blocks. That he laughs when the dog barks. I'm not allowed to see him anymore, but I stand across the street some mornings, just for a glimpse. He looks so happy. I tell myself that's enough, but it's not. It never will be. I wiped my eyes. The more I read, the more I realized Evelyn had never disappeared. She had been hidden behind a photo frame, behind a surname, behind the cold, distant expression my grandmother always wore when someone asked about the past, and now, piece by piece, she was emerging again. The next morning, I called the county records office. I requested any birth certificates, hospital admissions, and institutionalization records for Evelyn Rose, though I had little more than her name and a few dates to go on. To my surprise, the woman on the phone said something I hadn't expected. Evelyn Rose Dominguez, she asked. We have a sealed file on her from 1963. You'll need a court order to access it. My heart skipped. Dominguez. She had taken our last name, or had she been married to Grandpa? I hung up the phone, stunned. What I had uncovered was only the surface. Evelyn hadn't just been a lover, she had been family. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the photo of Evelyn holding a baby. It had been taken in black and white, probably by Grandpa himself. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, swaddled in a thin blanket. Her smile was soft, but tight, like someone trying to hold joy and fear in the same breath. There was no note on the back of the photo, no date, no confirmation. But deep down, I knew. That baby was my father. I thought about everything I knew about him, his quiet strength, his reserved nature, the way he always carried a weight he never explained. He was never a man of many words, but he was kind, steady, present. But now I wondered, had he felt it too? That something was always missing? I pulled out one of Evelyn's letters from the box. I dream of holding him again. I don't care if it's in secret, if I have to sneak through the garden and press my face to the glass just to see him smile. They say it's better this way, that he's safe. But I don't want safe. I want real. The ache in her words made me feel like I had known her my entire life, as if she had somehow passed that yearning through generations, embedding it in my bones. I remembered being a child and asking my father once why we never talked about Grandma's side of the family. He had just shrugged and said, "They're not worth talking about." I assumed it was bitterness, or maybe just distance. Now I realized it might have been something deeper, something he couldn't put into words because he didn't even know the truth. Or maybe some part of him did know. Maybe he sensed it, felt the holes in the narrative, the silence in the family albums, the way Grandma always tensed when he asked questions about his early childhood. I picked up the journal again and searched for an entry that mentioned my father by name. It didn't take long. Sam is 5 today. He asked if he could invite his friends from school over for cake. Evelyn would have loved that. She was always talking about birthdays, about balloons and party hats and chocolate icing. Instead, we had a quiet dinner. My wife baked a pie. No candles. He smiled anyway. He always does. He doesn't know the story behind his own eyes. He doesn't know the story behind his own eyes. I felt tears welling up. I imagined my father as a little boy, bright and hopeful, unaware of the storm that had shaped his arrival into this world. And then I felt something else. Anger. Not just at the system that allowed Evelyn to be institutionalized, not just at the family that colluded in silence, but at Grandpa too, because he let it happen. He watched the love of his life be erased, and he said nothing. He raised my father in a house where the truth was locked in a box in the attic, waiting for someone else to open it. I wanted to understand him. I wanted to believe he was doing what he thought was best, but part of me couldn't let go of the fact that he had decades to speak up, and he didn't. I stood up suddenly, needing air. I stepped out into the backyard, the grass cold, beneath my bare feet, the wind tugging at my sleeves. I looked around at the house I had once considered safe. Now it felt like a monument to buried truths. I took out my phone and opened the voice recording app. I needed to say it aloud. My name is Daniel. I'm 32 years old. My father, Samuel Dominguez, was not raised by his biological mother. Her name was Evelyn. She loved him. She fought for him. And they erased her from his story. I paused, then added, I'm going to fix that. It wasn't a vow made with anger. It was made with purpose. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that love isn't just what we give. It's what we fight to preserve. And someone had tried to erase Evelyn. But I had found her, and she would be forgotten no longer. That evening I called my cousin Ellie. I need to ask you something, I said. Anything. Do you remember Dad ever talking about being adopted? Or anything strange about his childhood? She was quiet for a moment. Then, he always joked that he must have been dropped off by aliens. He'd say things like, I'm the odd one out, or I probably got swapped in the hospital. We thought it was just his humor. I exhaled slowly. Maybe it wasn't just a joke. What's going on, Danny? I looked at the stack of letters beside me, the journal in my lap, the photograph in my hand. I think our whole family is built on a lie, I said. And I think it's time someone tells the truth. The letters were tied together with a delicate ribbon, light blue, frayed at the edges, and faded with time. There must have been over 50 of them, all addressed the same way. To my son. Not by name, just my son. I held them like something sacred. They were thin, written on cream-colored stationery, folded carefully and stored as if she believed, deep down, that one day he would read them. That one day, someone would care enough to deliver them. I untied the ribbon and opened the first. My sweet boy, I don't know your name. They won't tell me. I only know you're alive, and that you have your father's eyes. I think about you every hour. I imagine your first steps, your first laugh, the smell of your skin after a bath. I miss a life we never got to live. They say I'm unwell, but I'm not. I'm just broken. Broken from not holding you. From hearing your cries through the wall and being told I don't belong to you. But you belong to me. And I will never stop writing to you. I had to stop reading. For a moment, the handwriting was elegant but shaky, like someone forcing beauty through pain. I imagined Evelyn sitting alone in a cold room, writing with trembling hands, pouring everything she had into pages that no one ever delivered. I opened the next one, dated 3 months later. You're crawling now, I've heard. They say you're quiet, like your father. Thoughtful. You like to look at lights and listen to music. I wish I could sing to you again. Do you know I sang to you before you were born? Every night, I'd hum old songs from my childhood. You'd kick softly, like you were dancing. They told me it's better this way, that you'll have a proper life, that I should be grateful you're with people who can raise you right. But how can I be grateful for silence, for absence? You were meant to know me. Every letter was like this. Fragments of a life lived. In parallel, a mother watching from behind invisible walls, fighting to stay present in the only way she could, on paper. Every page was filled with quiet hope, sorrow, and the desperate love of a woman denied her child. And yet, she never stopped writing, not once. I saw you today. she wrote in one. Across the street, in the park. You were chasing a butterfly, laughing so freely it broke me. I wanted to run to you, but I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there and whispered your name, though you couldn't hear me. Another said, "It's your birthday today. You're 4. I baked a cake alone, just a small one. I sang happy birthday to the wall and imagined you were on the other side. I think you are. Somehow." I felt my throat close. She had lived her life in exile. Not from a country or a house, but from motherhood itself. She had been punished for loving the wrong man in the wrong time, and the people who had claimed to protect the family had silenced her into invisibility. And my father? He never knew. I sat back against the attic wall, the letters scattered around me like fallen petals, and asked the question I had been avoiding. Who kept them from him? Was it Grandpa? I didn't want to believe that. Not after everything I'd read. But if not him, then who? And then it came to me. Grandma. She had always been meticulous, always in control. She was the kind of woman who noticed when a teaspoon was out of place, who ironed the napkins for Sunday lunch, who kept the family calendar for decades. She would have seen these letters if they arrived. She would have intercepted them. She would have known exactly what Evelyn was trying to do, and she would have stopped it. I remembered her coldness whenever someone brought up the past. The way she shut down any questions about my father's early childhood. Her refusal to attend his wedding. Her distance with me. Her only grandson. As if I reminded her of something she worked hard to forget. And now I knew what it was. I was Evelyn's echo. I gathered the letters carefully and placed them back in order. There was one, near the bottom of the stack, that felt thicker than the others. I opened it slowly. Inside was a dried flower, pressed and taped delicately to the page. Beside it she had written, "This flower bloomed outside my window today. I picked it for you, because even though they don't let me hold you, I can still give you something beautiful. And one day, I hope you find this and know that I never stopped thinking of you. Love is not erased so easily." I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. This wasn't just a box of paper. It was a mother's entire lifetime, compacted into envelopes and stored in silence. And I knew, right then, that I couldn't let it end there. I couldn't keep this hidden like they had. I had to find a way to tell my father's story, the one he never got to hear, the one Evelyn spent her life trying to give him. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and looked around the attic one more time. There were more answers waiting, and I was going to find them. It took days of digging to find her. Her name was Margaret Harper, my grandmother's cousin. She was in her 80s now, living alone in a quiet retirement community 2 towns over. I found her name in an old family address book tucked behind the pantry door, one of those relics no one had bothered to throw out. Didn't expect her to answer the phone, but she did. Her voice was brittle, sharp around the edges, but still steady. When I told her who I was and mentioned my grandfather's name, there was a long pause. Then she said softly, "You found the letters, didn't you?" My breath caught. "Yes," I said. "And the journal, and the photographs." Another pause. Then, "You deserve the truth." 2 days later, I sat across from her in a modest living room with floral couches and doilies on every flat surface. A tray of tea sat untouched between us. She looked like time had folded her inward, thin hands, sunken eyes, but there was something fierce behind her gaze, something unshakable. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said, looking at me like I was the last chapter of a very old book. "Your grandmother worked hard to make sure this story stayed buried." "She knew?" I asked. "She orchestrated it," Margaret replied bluntly. "She didn't just know. She controlled every piece of it. The lies, the letters, the silence, all of it." I sank back in my chair. "She told people Evelyn had a breakdown," Margaret continued, "that she was a danger to herself, to the baby. But that was a lie. Evelyn was strong. Emotional, yes, but not unstable, just heartbroken. Why didn't anyone stop her? I asked. Why didn't someone tell my father the truth? Margaret looked at me with a bitterness that wasn't aimed at me, but at history itself. Because back then, men believed what their wives told them, and families didn't question their matriarchs. Your grandfather, he let it happen. I think the guilt destroyed him quietly, year after year. But your grandmother, she never once looked back. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of Evelyn's letters. I placed it on the table between us. Margaret didn't touch it, but she stared at it like it was holy. She used to read me pieces of those letters over the phone, she said, back when she was allowed to write, before they cut her off. You were in touch with her. Secretly. She mailed them from the institution before they tightened the rules. She trusted me. I tried to send her updates, photos of Sam, when I could get them. But your grandmother found out, and she stopped you. She threatened to destroy Evelyn's remaining letters if I ever contacted her again. I clenched my fists. All Evelyn wanted, I said, was to be known, to be seen, and they locked her away like she was shame. She was never the shame, Margaret whispered. They were. She reached over and opened a drawer in the end table beside her. From it, she pulled out a cassette tape. I've been holding on to this for 60 years, she said. Evelyn recorded it right before she was moved to a long-term facility. It was supposed to be for your father. She gave it to me in secret and made me promise I wouldn't destroy it. I stared at it like it was glowing. I don't have anything to play it on, I admitted. Margaret smiled faintly. That's all right, I do. She stood slowly and crossed the room to a dusty old tape deck on the shelf. She placed the cassette in, pressed play, and the machine whirred softly before a voice. Light, warm, slightly trembling, filled the room. Hello, my darling boy. This is your mother. Your real mother. I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't know if anyone will ever let you hear this. But I needed to speak to you at least once, even if only in this way. You were born from love. Don't let anyone tell you different. I carried you with joy. I waited for you with trembling hands, and when they took you away, they took the biggest part of me with you. I closed my eyes. The sound of her voice felt like warmth in my chest, like standing in sunlight after years in the cold. If you've grown up thinking I didn't want you, that I disappeared, that I didn't fight, you were lied to. I fought, I screamed, I wrote, and when the world stopped listening, I whispered your name into the wind every day, hoping it would carry to you somehow. I love you. I always loved you. The tape ended in soft static. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Margaret said, "It's your story now. You can leave it buried like they did, or you can bring her back into the light." I nodded, voice tight. "I will." I took the tape, thanked her, and promised I'd keep Evelyn's voice alive. As I drove away from that little house, the sun began to set in a sky streaked with orange and violet. For the first time since all this began, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure exactly, but clarity. I had found the keeper of the secret, and she had passed the flame to me. I listened to the tape 5 more times that night, not out of disbelief, but out of reverence. Each time Evelyn's voice wrapped around me like a thread, stitching together pieces of a history I never knew was mine to carry. There was something haunting about hearing someone speak from so long ago, especially someone whose voice had been silenced for so many years. But in her voice, I didn't hear bitterness. I heard hope. I sat alone in the living room, the lights off, the old tape deck crackling on the table in front of me. Her words played like a lullaby across generations. They told me you'd forget me, that you'd never even know my name. But I held on to the hope that one day you would hear me, that you would feel me in your bones, even if you didn't know why. It was then I realized what Evelyn had truly given me. Not just a mystery to solve, but a legacy to honor. I wasn't just uncovering what was hidden. I was reviving a love that had refused to die. I pulled out the letters again, this time laying them out in chronological order. I began reading them in tandem with the tape, matching moments, tracing time. The stories she told, of watching him play in the yard from across the street, of baking cakes alone on his birthday, of whispering lullabies through iron bars, became alive in my mind like scenes from a film I'd always needed to see. One letter stopped me cold. "I made a quilt for him," she wrote. "Each patch was a piece of me, a part of our story. I stitched it in the evenings when they let me be alone. I hid it in the attic of the White House on Maple Street. I left it there in hopes that someone, anyone, would find it. I grabbed my phone and searched. Maple Street was 5 minutes away. Heart pounding, I grabbed my keys and left the house. The streets were quiet, the world wrapped in that soft stillness only late-night hours can bring. When I pulled up to the address listed in Grandpa's old city directory, I saw it immediately. The White House. It had been sold years ago. A family now lived there, judging by the minivan and bicycles in the driveway. I hesitated, unsure of what I'd even say, what I was hoping to find. But I knocked. An older woman answered, her eyes wary but kind. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "I know this is strange, but did you ever find anything in your attic when you moved in? Maybe an old quilt?" She stared at me for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The attic was warm and dusty, the kind of space filled with the clutter of a busy family life. But in one corner, in a sealed plastic bin, was exactly what I hoped to find. A quilt, handmade, intricate, faded, but intact. Each patch was different. Some were floral, others patterned with children's toys, animals, stars. But at the center was a single square embroidered with trembling stitches. "To my son. From the mother who never left you." I couldn't breathe. The woman who owned the house looked at me, confused. "We always wondered about this." There was no note, no explanation. It didn't seem right to throw it away. "I know who made it," I whispered. She smiled gently. "Then I think it belongs with you." I held the quilt like a relic, like something sacred. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust and something floral. Lavender, maybe. I imagined Evelyn's hands moving over each thread, each stitch a word she hadn't been allowed to say. Back home, I laid it over the bed in the guest room and sat down beside it. I turned the tape on one more time. "You are loved," she said, "even if the world tried to convince you otherwise. Even if they changed your name, your story, your truth. You are mine. And I have never stopped being yours." Tears streamed down my face. She had never given up. Not for a moment. Not through institutions, silence, threats, or shame. She had left breadcrumbs, not in bitterness, but in hope. Hope that someone would one day find them. Hope that someone would care. That someone was me. I picked up the journal. Again, this time flipping to the last page. Grandpa's final entry was short. "The weight of the truth is nothing compared to the pain of burying it. If you found this, then I've finally done something right." He had broken, yes. But in the end, he had found the courage to begin undoing the damage. He had chosen not to take the secret to his grave, and for that, I was grateful. The next day, I called a historian friend of mine, someone who specialized in oral histories and archival preservation. "I have a story," I told her. "But more than that, I have a voice that deserves to be heard." I told her about Evelyn, about the letters, the journal, the tape, the quilt. "I want to preserve it," I said, "properly. I want to make sure she's remembered." She agreed without hesitation. And that afternoon, I began scanning letters, cataloging photos, documenting every thread of Evelyn's life that I could gather, not to put her on display, but to make sure her truth never again lived in the shadows. That night, as I sat with the quilt around my shoulders and the final echo of Evelyn's voice fading into silence, I made a decision. I was going to write her story, not just for me, but for the boy she never got to hold, for the man he became, and for the woman who never stopped loving him, even when the world erased her name. The quilt lay folded neatly at the foot of the guest, Bed, the tape carefully stored in a labeled case, the letters sealed in archival sleeves, and the journal sitting atop them like a guardian of the past. I had created an altar of memory, a shrine not to death, but to truth. And now came the hardest part, telling the family. I knew this wasn't a story that would sit quietly. It would cut, it would bruise, but it would also heal, if they let it. The problem was I wasn't sure who wanted healing and who preferred silence. I started with my mother. We sat in the kitchen, just the two of us. A pot of tea between us, like always. The house was too quiet now without Grandpa in his chair or Grandma's footsteps echoing across the hardwood. "I need to tell you something," I said, pushing the journal gently across the table toward her. She looked at it but didn't touch it. "Is this about Evelyn?" she asked. I blinked. "You knew?" She hesitated, then nodded. I knew the name. I knew there had been someone. But I didn't know everything. "Your grandmother was careful. She told me Evelyn was unstable, dangerous, that she had to be put away for everyone's safety." I believed her. "And Dad?" I asked. "Did he ever know?" She looked down, tears brimming. "I don't think so, but I'm not sure he didn't suspect. He always felt different, like something was being kept from him. Maybe that's why he never stayed close to this house." I slid one of the letters toward her. Evelyn wrote to him. For years, she was never dangerous. She was erased. She picked up the letter and began to read. Her lips quivered. "Why would your grandmother do this?" she whispered. "Pride. Control. Fear," I said. "She believed she was protecting the family, but all she did was bury it." My mother closed the letter and wiped her eyes. "You have to tell Ellie. Ellie was my cousin. She was closest to my father, more than I had been in those last years. She deserved to know." I invited her over that weekend when I showed her the photos, the quilt, the recordings. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I always felt like we were living in someone else's story," she whispered. "Now I know why." We spent the afternoon reading through the letters, piecing together Evelyn's life, and somewhere, in between the third and fourth letter, Ellie looked at me and said, "We can't keep this to ourselves." It was then I understood what my grandfather had really given me. His final gift wasn't the letter or the journal. It was permission. Permission to break the cycle of silence. Permission to put truth before legacy. Permission to remember the one woman everyone else had tried to forget. We decided to hold a family gathering, not a reunion, not a party, just a conversation. In the living room where it all began, we sat with the journal on the coffee table and Evelyn's photograph framed beside it. Some came. Some didn't. Those who did listened in stunned silence as I told the story, not as accusation, but as restoration. I read Evelyn's words aloud. I played the tape. I passed around the quilt. Some cried. Others sat motionless, staring at the ground. My uncle stood up and left halfway through, but my aunt stayed. And when I finished, she walked to the photo and whispered, "I'm sorry," through her tears. I didn't expect full acceptance, but I had hoped for understanding. And slowly, quietly, I saw it begin to form, like cracks in a long-frozen lake thawing under spring's first sun. In the days that followed, more relatives reached out. Some shared old stories, hints they now realized had always pointed toward Evelyn. A cousin brought a postcard that had been intercepted and kept hidden in a drawer for decades. Another had a photograph of my father as a baby, one she now suspected had originally come from Evelyn herself. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. Evelyn was no longer a ghost. She was a mother, a fighter, a woman who refused to vanish. And my grandfather? He wasn't just a man who failed to act. He was a man who, in his final days, made the bravest decision of his life. He let the truth live. I stood by his grave one morning, the journal in my hands, the sun rising behind me. "I understand now," I whispered. "You didn't just want me to know. You needed someone to make it right." I placed the journal gently at the base of the headstone, closed my eyes, and imagined Evelyn standing just beyond the trees, scarf around her neck, smiling at the boy she never got to hold, and the man who finally gave her back her voice. 6. Months later, I stood in front of a new headstone. It sat beside my grandfather's, beneath the same oak tree that had watched over our family plot for generations. The grass had started to grow in around the fresh soil, soft and green under the morning light. The name etched into the granite was one that had never belonged here before: Evelyn Rose Dominguez, 1937. 1971 loved. Silenced, remembered. It wasn't just a stone. It was a correction, a declaration, a name finally placed where it should have been all along. I didn't bury her body here. There was no exhumation, no ceremony of bones. But I brought her here in spirit. I brought her quilt, her letters, a copy of the tape, the story. I brought her legacy, and I laid it to rest beside the man who had loved her in silence and, in his final breath, trusted me to speak it out loud. As I stood there, a soft wind passed through the trees. For a moment I imagined it was her, smiling, free, no longer hidden behind hospital doors or forged papers or whispers at family dinners. She had been erased. But now, she was written back in. I turned and saw Ellie approaching, holding a bundle in her hands. She placed it at the base of Evelyn's headstone, a small arrangement of wildflowers and a framed photograph of my father. He deserved to know, she said quietly. I know, I replied. But maybe now, she added, he does. That thought stayed with me for days. I'd spent so long thinking of what was lost, what my father never knew, what Evelyn never got to say, what my grandfather never had the strength to change, that I hadn't considered what still remained. Memory and legacy. I began writing that week, not just notes or journal entries, but the full story. I wrote about Evelyn's laughter, pieced together from descriptions in Grandpa's journal, about the way she wore her red scarf in every season as if it were a banner. I wrote about her son, my father, and the hole he carried without ever naming it. I wrote about my grandfather, his weakness, his regret, and finally, his redemption. I didn't leave anyone out, not even Grandma, because even in her cruelty, she had shaped the silence I was now breaking. And I believed people deserved to see the truth, raw and whole. When I finished, I titled the manuscript, The Woman in the Red Scarf, and I printed 3 copies. One I donated to the local historical society under Evelyn's name. The second, I left in the attic where the story had waited all these years. The third I kept for myself, a reminder of what happens when love is denied and truth is buried. Weeks later, I received a call from a publisher. They were interested. They said the story felt like something people needed to read. I didn't think about fame or money. I thought about Evelyn's hands on a typewriter or a notepad, scribbling letters she hoped might someday matter, and now they would. The book was published the following spring. I held it in my hands on the porch of Grandpa's house, under the setting sun. The same porch where he once rocked me as a boy. The same porch where Evelyn may have once stood, unseen. I imagined them both there with me, him quiet, her smiling, their hands finally joined in the light. That night I returned to the family plot one last time. I sat between their graves and read aloud. Not all 200 pages, just the final few paragraphs. The ones that spoke of Evelyn's hope, her strength, and her refusal to disappear. The words that reminded anyone who listened that love, real love, leaves traces, even when the world tries to sweep them away. When I finished, I placed the book between their stones, wrapped in her quilt, sealed in plastic against the elements, and I whispered, "You're home now." I walked away slowly, not with grief, but with purpose. Because I had rewritten the family name, not with ink, not with revenge, but with truth. And truth, when spoken with love, doesn't just set you free. It sets everything right. If this story moved something in you, Don't leave without sharing your voice. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if there's a story in your own family that stayed hidden for too long. Your words matter here. We read everyone. And if you believe that love can outlive silence, shame, and even time itself, then subscribe to Grandfather Great Love. Here, we tell the stories that were almost lost, and we remember the people the world tried to forget. Because sometimes, what matters most isn't what was passed down, but what was finally brought to light. See you in the next story, and until then, never stop remembering.